Hello, everyone. I want to talk to you guys about some of the thoughts that I've had today. I just did a video about how a pagan can be more Christian than actual Christians, and I used the example of Julius Caesar to explain this. Because Julius Caesar was a man who, yes, he was the leader of a pagan civilization, a pagan empire. Yes, he was a heathen, a pagan, absolutely. He did not know the true God. But at the same time, he would exhibit Christian characteristics. He would show mercy to his enemies, people who warred against his soldiers. Once they surrendered, once they asked for mercy, once they asked for friendship from Rome, Caesar would grant it to them, unless they abused his kindness, as was the case with the Gaulish tribe, the Attuatusi, who, after asking for a truce with Rome, attacked the Roman camp, only to be defeated and its entire civilian population sold into slavery. But nonetheless, before that, the Attuatusi was a hostile nation against Rome, against Julius Caesar. And Julius Caesar was preparing to go to war with them. And once they saw the siege tower that the Romans were about to use on their fortification, on their large earth mound, they asked for mercy, and Caesar granted it to them. The warlike tribe of Gaul, the Nervi, one of the great nations of Gaul, which had a very large army of about 60,000 men. Once the Nervi were defeated by Julius Caesar, yes, he destroyed their army, but he did not allow for a massacre to be done upon the Nervi's civilian population. This was Julius Caesar showing mercy. And I talked about these examples. I talked about how Julius Caesar was someone who did have civility and diplomacy. He did have an understanding, some understanding of right from wrong. And then I made a comparison. I made a comparison to some of the tragedies that took place in the Crusades. I talked about how there was a French Catholic monk by the name of Ralph of Cayenne, and how he wrote a book about the First Crusade, and how he talked about how some Crusaders were out they would literally go out and pursue kids. They would go out and to kidnap kids in Jerusalem. He doesn't give us the reason as to why they wanted to kidnap kids, but if I had to assume, I would say that they wanted to use these kids as slaves. He talks about how they would even slaughter elderly people. They would go out and kill civilians. It was brutal. It was vicious. There was another account that I read about the First Crusade in which Eastern Christians who were native to Jerusalem would have to sing Christian songs when the French Crusaders were killing people in the city. They would have to sing Christian songs so that the Crusaders could distinguish them from the Muslims. But they were cases of French Crusader knights just being in a rage, being absolutely in a frenzy, and killing Christians anyway, because they were just so lost in their rage and adrenaline. And there was a lot of messed up things that happened in the Crusades. Now, there is the most infamous atrocity that was committed in the Crusades, and that was the sacking of Constantinople in the year 1204. And this was absolutely horrific, and that goes without saying. They would literally rape. I mean, you hear about Christians going to war, right? If the war is righteous, if the war is necessary, if the war is noble, if the war is about advancing civility and noble principles, then that's fine. That's understandable. But to hear about Christians raping, it's just beyond me. It's just beyond me, because rape has nothing to do with Christianity. Rape is anti-Christian. By its very act, it's anti-Christian. It's not just that it has nothing to do with Christianity. It is anti-Christian. It's evil. It's satanic. And for Christians to, people claiming Christianity, because these people weren't Christian, but these were people who claimed Christianity. For people to claim Christianity and rape and pillage, it's pure evil. Now, you hear about the Roman Empire having gladiatorial matches and having people kill each other as a spectacle, as entertainment. You read about how the Roman Empire would feed Christians to bears and lions and leopards. And that was absolutely evil. That was the evil of paganism. But nonetheless, because paganism is ultimately a corruption of the true religion, going back to Noah, there are still remnants of light. They are still particles of light that can be found in pagan Roman civilization. And I would say that there were some pagans who were better than others. There were pagans who were absolute cannibals. There were pagans who were absolutely, utterly obsessed with human sacrifice. And they would do human sacrifices all the time. It was a part of their society. It was a part of their religion and their culture. And there were pagans that weren't so much into that. Like the Romans, they did have human sacrifice. Now, in terms of actual human sacrifice, where they would take a victim and say, okay, this is going to be blood spilt to please the gods, they would do that. Yes, that did happen within Roman civilization, although it was nowhere near as common as it was in other pagan societies, like with the Gauls or the Aztecs. The Romans did have human sacrifice mainly in the form of gladiatorial matches. And gladiatorial matches were marketed as entertainment. They were done as a spectacle, but a very evil and brutal one. But nonetheless, the idea of the gladiatorial matches was something that sprung from an actual ritual of human sacrifice. Tertullian talks about this in one of his books. He tells us about how there was a ritual amongst an Italian people called the Etruscans. These were the ancestors of the Tuscans, the people of Tuscany. You go to Olive Garden, you have their Tuscan kale soup or whatever. Yeah, that comes from those people, right? But the Etruscans had a ritual in which they would sacrifice a slave, and each noble family would conduct this ritual. Each noble family would have a slave that they would sacrifice as a way to please their gods. And then they decided one day to just have two slaves kill one another. The one that died was the sacrifice, and they would do this every single year, and eventually it became a spectacle. It became something to watch for entertainment. But nonetheless, they still saw them as pleasing to the gods, and this is one of the reasons why pagans were actually very upset with people who converted to Christianity, because these Christian converts would refuse to attend the gladiatorial matches, and they were seen as angering the gods because they weren't going to these games, which were seen as pleasing to the gods. So that was definitely the evil of the Roman Empire. They had a lot of homosexuality. Pedophilia was very rampant in Greco-Roman civilization. In fact, there was this idea in Greco-Roman civilization that the love between two men was superior to the love between a man and a woman. A lot of sick ideas flourished in the pagan Roman Empire. I am not saying that the pagan Roman Empire was amazing or it was just this beacon of morality and principles. What I am saying is that because paganism was a corruption of the truth, and what I mean by that is that there was the original religion established by God. There was the first religion established by God, the true religion established by God, given to Adam and Eve. They had children. Then humanity went corrupt. God destroyed all of humanity with a flood, with the exception of Noah and his family. Noah was a priest who taught the true religion to his 3 sons, to his children. And that true religion would be passed on to their children as well. Somewhere along the line, that religion got corrupted. And we can see an underlining of this corruption in the book of Genesis, in Genesis chapter 11, where you read about the Tower of Babel. And the Tower of Babel was a mark of this corruption. Mankind building a pagan temple to reach to the heavens. Now, people think that the builders of Babel really believed that they were really going to reach heaven. That's not what that was about. It was about a temple that could be used to communicate with the constellations, with the stars and the planets, because they believed that these things were divine. So you can already see that it didn't take very long for mankind to delve into paganism. The Tower of Babel was built by Nimrod. It wasn't completed, but the building was done under the government of Nimrod, who ruled over 3 cities. Babel, I think it was Babel, Calneh, I don't remember the other one, but he ruled over several cities in Mesopotamia, and he was a son of Cush. Cush was one of the sons of Ham. Ham was one of the sons of Noah. So this was a great-grandchild of Noah. So it didn't take very long for humanity to get into paganism and to corrupt the original religion, the true religion. But nonetheless, because paganism is a corruption of the true religion, they are most definitely little bits of truth that were left in paganism. There were remnants of truth that were found in paganism. And St. Paul is in one of his sermons, you can find probably the best example of this when he's preaching to the Athenians on Mars Hill. And he takes note of the fact that they had an altar to the unknown God. And who is this unknown God? Well, the Greeks forgot about him. They forgot who he was, so they just called him the unknown God. And St. Paul says, you have here an altar to the unknown God. I will tell you who he is. He is Jesus Christ. So they had a knowledge. At one point, they had this knowledge of the true God. They forgot about him, but the knowledge of the true God was still lingering in their memories. And so they just said, well, we'll just build an altar to him. We'll just call it the altar of the unknown God. Okay, we'll just, But then they went off and they worshipped Zeus and Athena and all these heathen deities. But there definitely was truth in paganism. There definitely was remnants of the light in paganism. Some pagan civilizations went almost completely dark. The Aztec Empire is a great example of this. I would say that the Aztec Empire, I think it went totally into the dark. I don't think there was... There could have been little bits of truth in their religion. I think they believed that initially the gods made man out of clay, so there is a little bit of truth here and there, but their civilization was so evil, it was just entirely in darkness, regardless of the little bits of truth it may have had. That's how bad it was, because they were so into human sacrifice that they would slaughter thousands of people every day for their gods. Now, when the Spaniards invaded Mexico, they were immediately approached by several different tribes who begged them for help. They begged the Spaniards for help. They said that we are being oppressed by the Aztecs. The Aztecs demand of us taxation in literal living human beings so that they can sacrifice them to their gods. The Aztec Empire is completely evil. Please help us. And Cortez had mercy on these people. He didn't say, oh, let's just kill them. In fact, when Cortez was... before he invaded the Aztec Empire, he got into a battle with another tribe, and this tribe was pretty close to defeating Cortez, and they were going to kill all the Spaniards. And right when they were in the midst of their fighting, the chief of the tribe intervened and said, "What the hell are you guys doing?" And the son of the chief said, "Oh, father, these men are invaders. We're going to kill them all." And the father said, "What are you doing? We can work with these people to defeat the Aztecs." And the son was like, "Yeah, that's a good idea." So you can see there was civility amongst these tribes. Not all the tribes were completely dark. Not all the tribes were utterly savage. Not all tribes did cannibalism. A lot of them did, but not all of them did. And I think even though they were pagans, not all of them did cannibalism, and I think they knew that it was wrong, it was evil. Not all pagan peoples committed cannibalism. I think there were even Aboriginals in Australia who never did cannibalism, and there were Aboriginals who did do cannibalism. So there were some tribes that were more civil than others, which really goes to show that it wasn't all just black and white. Because paganism was a corruption of the true religion from Noah, I believe that certain people preserved the truth more than others, and they preserved God's principles more than others. And Cortez showed mercy to the tribes. He showed mercy to the tribes. He worked with the civilized tribes, the more civilized tribes, against the utterly savage tribe of the Aztecs. And by the time Cortez came to the city of the Aztec Empire, Tenochtitlan, he had an army of about, I want to say 900,000 or so native warriors who were allies to him. And together they crushed the Aztecs. And even though those people were pagan, they saw in Cortez something beautiful and something civil and something just enlightening, as opposed to the darkness of the paganism that surrounded them. And after the Aztec Empire was crushed, there was the king of Michoacan. Michoacan today is a state of Mexico, but before there was a Mexico, before the Spaniards came, there was a kingdom of Michoacan. And the kingdom of Michoacan was the biggest enemy to the Aztec Empire, because no matter how many times the Aztecs tried to conquer Michoacan, they couldn't. Michoacan was, I think, one of the last kingdoms in Mexico that could not be touched by the Aztecs. I think there were several other tribes that the Aztecs did not defeat, could not conquer, but definitely I would say the kingdom of Michoacan was the biggest one, if not one of the biggest. So not definitely. Scratch that. So anyway, when the Aztecs were finally defeated, a messenger was sent by the king of Michoacan to Cortez asking for a meeting. Cortez visited the king of Michoacan, and the king told him, I saw what you've done with the Aztecs, and I'm going to give my kingdom to you because I like what you've done. You are a great ruler. And so instead of fighting, and this was the king of Michoacan. Michoacan was always fighting the Aztec Empire. These people were not cowards. These were very valiant, courageous people. And here was the king voluntarily giving his kingdom away to Spanish rule. It's really remarkable. So here was a pagan who wasn't evil, who was decent enough to just allow his kingdom to be controlled by Christians. And Michoacan was the region of Mexico that actually absorbed Christian and Spanish culture more so than any other region of Mexico. And if you go to Michoacan today, you can definitely see that. I mean, it's almost like you're in Madrid. Michoacan is probably a lot worse than it was when I was there because of the gang violence. But when I was there back in 2006, it was a beautiful city. And I remember saying to myself, why take a plane to Spain when you can just come to Michoacan? It's a beautiful place. So here was an example of Christians invading a Christian land, showing mercy to the people, destroying evil, and advancing Christian principles, advancing the light of God. But then you have an example of the Normans. These were Germanic French people who were Catholic. They had converted to Catholicism. And the Normans would eventually lead the Crusades. They were the people of the Crusades. They were the Franks. So hold on, I said Normans. These were the Franks, but the Franks I think were also Germanic. I think they were also related to the Normans. Correct me on that if I'm wrong. But the Franks would lead the Crusades. These were the people of the Crusades, and they would eventually sack the city of Constantinople in the year 1204. Now, what's interesting is when they ruled over the Holy Land, when they ruled over Jerusalem, they had their Latin kingdom. They had different rules, which to me were kind of strange. Like, for example, if you were an Eastern Christian, not a Latin Christian, if you were an Eastern Christian, your testimony was worth half of that of a Latin Christian. Very bizarre rules, which I don't see how they I don't see how they are in accordance to Christianity. This idea of saying, well, because he's an Eastern Christian, his testimony is worth half of that of a Latin Christian. To me, it's very bizarre to have such rules and really antithetical to Christianity. Eventually, the French Catholics would sack Constantinople. Again, this was not from some order from the Pope. I'm not saying that this was like official Vatican policy, but nonetheless, there were Crusaders who did not go to Jerusalem one time, and they decided to go to Constantinople, and they sacked the city. They were there for some political reason. They were there to help some Greek guy take the throne. I forgot his name, but that's not the point. The point is that they sacked a Christian city, and they raped and they pillaged and they slaughtered and they devastated the whole city. And to this day, the Greek Orthodox have not forgotten this. And it reminds me of other things that have happened in history, modern history, in which you see people who claim Christianity doing atrocious things. Before I get to that, let me just, I almost forgot to mention this. Before the sacking of Constantinople, and no one ever talks about this. I have never heard actually anyone talk about this. I read about this years ago in a, pretty certain I read this in a Byzantine text, a medieval Byzantine text, but there was a massacre of Roman Catholics that happened in Constantinople years and years before the Crusaders sacked Constantinople in 1204. In the year 1182, there was a pogrom against Roman Catholics in the city of Constantinople. The reason, the type of propaganda that was used to fan the flames was that the Italian merchants in Constantinople were very wealthy. They were amassing a lot of money, and they were outcompeting the Greek merchants, the Greek businesses. This was used to fan the flames of rage, and there was a riot against Latins, and tens of thousands of Catholics were butchered, driven out of the city, or sold into slavery. It was really horrific, and that happened years and years prior to the sacking of Constantinople that a lot of people talk about. And again, this was a massacre that was done by people claiming Christianity. In our modern times, we have examples of this. There were the Croatian Ustaša, who butchered about 1 million people, mainly Serbs, but they also killed Jewish people, gypsies. These were fascists who allied with the Nazis. There were Ukrainian Catholics who joined the SS, and they made up their own SS unit called the Galician Unit, the SS Galicium. And these were Catholics who joined the SS, thanks in part to the recruitment that was done by a major Ukrainian Catholic leader. His name was Joseph Slippy, and Joseph Slippy was a major Catholic leader in Ukraine who helped form the SS Galician, and these were Ukrainian Catholics, and they would butcher other Catholics, Polish Catholics, and they would commit horrific massacres. And then there was something that happened in the 1980s. In 1982, there was the massacres of Sabra and Shatila, in which Catholics, Lebanese Catholic fascists, people claiming the cross, who don't have the cross, went into Palestinian refugee camps and in a matter of about 3 days or so butchered thousands of people, raped and butchered thousands of people. It's one of the more recent major massacres of our time. And again, these were done by people who claimed Catholicism. This was done by Maronite Catholics. And the Palestinians had surrendered. Part of the deal was that the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization paramilitary group, the PLO would leave the refugee camps, but the civilian population would be untouched. The Maronites agreed to this and then lied and they broke their word. Once the PLO was gone, there were no men with arms to protect the civilian population. And so they went in and had a massacre. And they indulged in their blood rage. They indulged in their bloodlust, and they butchered thousands of people. This was all done under the superintendents of Israel. And yet we have conservatives today who claim Christianity, praising the Lebanese fascists as if they were great men of principle on the cross. And this is farthest from the truth. These men were fascist, they were racist, they were butchers, and they committed horrendous atrocities, raped, just like those Crusaders in Constantinople in 1204. And it's so sickening to see people claiming the cross and doing these horrors. And you go to the Catholic Church today and you will read about priests who are pedophiles, who were protected by the church for decades. You will read about Catholic priests who prey on young men, who sexually harass young men, and they will be protected by the institution until the media finds out, and then it's bad publicity for the church to keep protecting them. It's sickening to see Christianity, well, not Christianity, but it's sickening to see the church being used as a refuge for demons. And it goes back to what Jesus told the Pharisees. You see, the Pharisees were the religious leaders of Jesus' time. They were the heads of the temple that was established by God. And Jesus told them, "You are of your father, the devil, who was a murderer from the beginning." And although the temple was founded by God, those who were running it were of their father, Satan. And though the church was founded by Jesus Christ, it has been being ran for quite some time by very evil people. Not all of them. There have been some very righteous Catholics, very righteous Orthodox Christians, don't get me wrong. There was Pope Pius XII, who was a very righteous pope. But there have always been those whose father is the devil. And today you have people who claim Christianity who are really no different than the Pharisees who killed Christ. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.